That woman belongs on my land.
She isn't your property.
Then this ranch becomes your grave.
Elias Rowan believed he knew exactly how the rest of his life would unfold. He would build the largest ranch in Red Cedar Valley, grow old alone, and never give another woman the chance to break his heart. Then, on one cool autumn afternoon in 1888, a young schoolteacher stepped off the stagecoach, looked him straight in the eye, and quietly said, "I've come because you're the only man who can save my family's future." Neither of them knew that one decision made before sunset would change both their lives forever. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The wind carried the scent of dry grass across Red Cedar Valley as the afternoon stagecoach rolled toward the small frontier town. It wasn't a place that attracted many strangers. Most people who arrived were cattle buyers, traveling salesmen, or families passing through on their way farther west. Everyone else already belonged there. Every fence, every ranch house, and every dusty storefront held a story that stretched back years. That was why the arrival of a young woman traveling alone drew more attention than anyone cared to admit. By the time the horses stopped in front of the general store, half the town had quietly found a reason to be nearby. Clara Bennett stepped down from the coach with careful grace, holding a worn leather suitcase in one hand and a bundle of books tied together with twine in the other. She paused for only a moment, taking in the endless fields, the weathered buildings, and the mountains rising in the distance. She had imagined this place 100 different ways while reading her father's old letters, yet standing there felt entirely different. This valley held the answer to a promise made many years earlier, and if those letters were true, the man she had come to find still lived here. She whispered a silent prayer before thanking the driver and making her way toward the general store. Inside, conversation slowed as the bell above the door announced her arrival. The owner, Harold Mercer, greeted her warmly while pretending not to notice that every customer had suddenly become interested in the shelves nearest the counter. Clara smiled politely before asking a question that made the room unexpectedly quiet. "Could you tell me where I can find Elias Rowan?" A few men exchanged quick glances. One elderly rancher chuckled softly into his coffee, while another simply nodded toward the open window overlooking the road leading out of town. "If he's not fixing a fence," the old man said, "he'll be at Rowan Ranch, about 5 miles east." Clara thanked him, picked up her suitcase once more, and walked back into the afternoon sun, unaware that nearly everyone in town was now wondering why a young woman had come looking for the valley's most reserved rancher. The road to Rowan Ranch stretched across rolling grasslands that shimmered beneath the late afternoon sun. Clara walked without complaint, stopping only once to adjust the weight of her suitcase. Every step carried her farther from the safety of town and closer to a man she had never met. She knew only what her father had written years before. "If you are ever left with nowhere to turn, find Elias Rowan. His word is stronger than most men's signatures." Her father had never explained why he believed that so deeply. Before Clara was old enough to ask, he was gone, leaving behind little more than those carefully folded letters and a hope she was now trusting with everything she had left. A mile outside town, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the silence. A ranch hand reined in beside her and removed his hat politely. "Miss, that's a long walk with a heavy case. Headed somewhere?" Clara smiled gratefully, but held her ground. "Rowan Ranch." The young cowboy raised his eyebrows before nodding toward the wagon behind him. "You're in luck. I'm headed that way with supplies." She accepted the ride, grateful for the kindness, though she noticed he studied her with the same curiosity everyone else had shown since she'd arrived. Near the largest corral, Elias Rowan tightened the final rail on a fence before wiping the dust from his hands. Even from a distance, Clara recognized him without anyone needing to point him out. He was taller than the other ranch hands, broad-shouldered and steady, wearing a weathered tan hat above calm blue eyes that seemed to notice everything around him. His movements were unhurried, every task completed with quiet confidence. When the supply wagon stopped nearby, he looked up only briefly, expecting another delivery. Instead, he found himself looking at a young woman who stepped down holding a worn leather suitcase and a bundle of books. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Elias wasn't a man easily surprised. Yet something about the stranger standing before him made him pause. Clara took a slow breath, gathering the courage that had carried her across 3 states. "Mr. Rowan?" she asked softly. He nodded once. "I'm Elias Rowan." She tightened her grip on the suitcase before meeting his eyes. "My name is Clara Bennett. I believe my late father knew you. And I've come because I need to ask something no stranger has any right to ask." Elias studied her for several long seconds without saying a word. It wasn't that he was unfriendly. He had simply learned that strangers rarely appeared at his ranch without wanting something. Some came asking for work, others hoped to borrow money, and a few wanted to convince him to sell a piece of his land. Yet the woman standing before him looked different. She wasn't nervous because she feared rejection. She was nervous because whatever she had come to say mattered more than her own pride. "My father's name was Samuel Bennett," Clara continued quietly. "He passed away 6 months ago." The name stirred something deep in Elias's memory. He hadn't heard it spoken in nearly 15 years. Samuel had once ridden beside him during one of the harshest winters Red Cedar Valley had ever known. Back then, Elias had been little more than a determined young ranch hand trying to build a future. Samuel had helped him when almost no one else would. Afterward, life had carried them in different directions, and the letters between them had slowly stopped. "I remember your father," Elias finally replied. "He was an honest man." Clara lowered her eyes for a moment before reaching into her satchel. Carefully unfolding an old envelope whose edges had yellowed with age, she held it out with both hands. "He asked me to give you this if I ever found myself with nowhere else to go." Elias recognized the handwriting before he even opened the letter. It was unmistakably Samuel's. The paper felt fragile beneath his fingers as he unfolded it. His eyes moved slowly across each line, and with every sentence his expression became more thoughtful. Samuel wrote that if fate ever brought Clara to Red Cedar Valley alone, he hoped Elias would help her as he once had helped him. There was no demand, no contract, only a father's final request to the one man he still trusted completely. When Elias finished reading, he folded the letter with great care and slipped it back into the envelope. The ranch hands nearby had quietly returned to their work, pretending not to notice the unusual meeting. Clara waited patiently, saying nothing. She had spent weeks wondering whether this moment would end with kindness or disappointment. "I can offer you a room for the night," Elias said at last. "You've traveled a long way, and it wouldn't be right to send you back to town before dark." Relief washed over Clara's face, though she quickly composed herself. "Thank you, Mr. Rowan. I won't be a burden. I'll leave first thing in the morning if that's what you want." Elias shook his head gently. "We'll decide tomorrow what comes next." He picked up her heavy suitcase before she could protest and started toward the ranch house. Clara followed a few steps behind, unaware that from the porch of a neighboring property, another pair of eyes had been watching the entire exchange. Warren Blackwood, the valley's wealthiest landowner, lowered his field glasses slowly. The moment he heard the name Bennett, an old memory returned, one he had spent years hoping would never come back to haunt him. The Rowan Ranch house was warmer than Clara Bennett had imagined during the long ride across the Wyoming prairie. The moment Elias Rowan pushed open the heavy oak door, the comforting heat from a roaring stone fireplace wrapped around her like a welcoming embrace. The scent of fresh bread mingled with slow-cooked beef stew, roasted vegetables, and the faint aroma of pine wood burning in the hearth. After weeks of sleeping in noisy boarding houses, crowded stagecoach stations, and drafty guest rooms, the simple comfort of the ranch house almost brought tears to her eyes. She paused just inside the doorway, quietly taking in every detail. The house reflected the man who owned it. Nothing was extravagant, yet everything was cared for with remarkable attention. The polished wooden floors bore the marks of decades of honest work. Handmade quilts rested neatly over sturdy rocking chairs. Shelves were lined with worn leather-bound books about farming, cattle breeding, American history, and scripture. Above the fireplace hung a faded cavalry saber beside an old family portrait. Nearby, a carefully folded American flag rested inside a glass display case, protected from dust as though it represented something far greater than cloth. Every corner spoke of discipline, responsibility, and quiet pride. Before Clara could admire the room any longer, footsteps approached from the kitchen. An older woman appeared carrying a wooden spoon in one hand while wiping the other on her flour-covered apron. Her silver hair disappeared beneath a cream-colored bonnet. and years of kindness had softened every line on her weathered face. The moment she saw Clara, her eyes brightened with genuine warmth. "Mr. Rowan," she said with a welcoming smile, "I wasn't expecting company this evening." Elias removed his hat and placed Clara's leather suitcase beside the staircase. "Mrs. Abigail Foster," he replied calmly. "This is Miss Clara Bennett. She'll be staying here tonight." Abigail needed no further explanation. She stepped forward, gently taking Clara's hands into her own. "Then you're already family for as long as you're under this roof," she said. "Welcome to Rowan Ranch, dear." The unexpected kindness caught Clara completely off guard. She had spent the last several months learning not to expect generosity from strangers. Since her father's passing, every town had reminded her how quickly people judged a young woman traveling alone. Some looked at her with suspicion, others with pity. A few saw only an opportunity to take advantage of someone with nowhere else to go. But Abigail looked at her as though she had been expected all along. "Thank you," Clara said softly. "You've shown me more kindness in 5 minutes than I've received in many weeks." Abigail simply smiled. "Then we'll have to make up for those lost weeks before you leave." Within minutes, supper was served. The dining table was modest but inviting, covered with homemade bread, fresh butter, beef stew, roasted potatoes, carrots, sweet corn, and warm apple preserves prepared during the summer harvest. Oil lamps cast a gentle golden light across the room, while the fire crackled softly nearby. For a while, conversation remained comfortable but careful. Abigail spoke about the coming Wyoming winter, explaining how snow often buried the valley for weeks at a time. She described spring cattle drives, autumn harvests, and the close-knit families who depended upon one another whenever storms isolated the ranches. Clara listened with growing fascination. Everything about Red Cedar Valley seemed different from the busy eastern towns she had known growing up. People here measured wealth differently, not by fine clothing or expensive houses, but by dependable neighbors, strong fences, healthy cattle, good horses, and whether a person's word could still be trusted after difficult times. Eventually, Abigail mentioned something that immediately caught Clara's attention. "Our little schoolhouse has been empty since spring," she said sadly. "Poor Mrs. Collins became too ill to continue teaching, and we've not found anyone willing to stay." Clara looked up. "No teacher at all?" Abigail shook her head. "The children learn what they can from traveling ministers, retired soldiers, or whoever happens to know enough reading and arithmetic to spare a few afternoons." A silence settled over the table. Finally, Clara spoke. "I taught school before caring for my father." Elias looked up from his plate for the first time that evening. "You were a teacher?" She smiled faintly. "For nearly 4 years." Her voice softened as memories returned. "There isn't another profession I'd rather have." Watching children discover something new for the first time, seeing them realize they can read a difficult passage or solve a problem they once feared, those moments made every long day worthwhile. Abigail exchanged a quiet glance with Elias. "I believe the Lord has remarkable timing," she said. "Perhaps he brought you here for far more than you realize." Neither Clara nor Elias answered immediately, yet the thought remained with both of them. Red Cedar Valley had struggled for years to keep a qualified teacher. Most stayed only until the first harsh winter. Others left because the salary barely covered necessities. Few possessed the patience required to teach children whose lives revolved around ranch work instead of classrooms. Someone like Clara was exactly what the valley had needed for years. After supper, Clara insisted on helping Abigail clear the dishes despite repeated protests. The two women washed plates together while quietly exchanging stories about their lives. Abigail spoke of her late husband, who had once ridden cattle alongside Elias's father before losing his life during a blizzard many years earlier. Rather than leave the ranch, she had stayed to help raise Elias after his own mother passed away. "He doesn't speak much," Abigail admitted with a gentle smile. "But don't mistake silence for coldness. He simply believes actions tell the truth far better than words." Clara found herself smiling. "I've noticed." When the kitchen had finally been cleaned, Clara stepped outside onto the wide wooden porch. Cool autumn air greeted her. Above her stretched the clearest night sky she had ever seen. Thousands upon thousands of brilliant stars covered the Wyoming heavens, while the distant mountains stood quietly beneath silver moonlight. She wrapped her cream shawl more tightly around her shoulders and listened. No wagon wheels. No crowded streets. No shouting voices. Only the distant sound of cattle settling into the night, horses shifting inside the stable, crickets singing in the tall prairie grass, and the gentle wind moving through the cottonwood trees. For the first time since her father had died, she felt safe. Yet one question refused to leave her thoughts. Had Samuel Bennett truly sent her here simply for shelter? Or was there another reason he had trusted Elias Rowan above every other man he had ever known? Inside the ranch house, Elias remained seated at the dining table. Samuel's letter rested open before him. He read it again, more slowly this time. One sentence stopped him completely. If Clara ever reaches your door, tell her the truth about the Silver Creek land. She deserves to know what was taken from her family. Elias leaned back in his chair. Silver Creek. He had not heard those words spoken in years. Samuel had once insisted that the fertile land along Silver Creek rightfully belonged to the Bennett family, until complicated legal documents mysteriously transferred ownership to someone else. Whenever anyone questioned him, Samuel would simply say powerful men had made certain the truth would never reach a courtroom. Elias folded the letter carefully. Just then, a firm knock echoed through the quiet house. It was well past supper. Visitors rarely arrived after dark. Elias crossed the room and opened the front door. Standing beneath the porch lantern was Sheriff Thomas Reed. Dust still covered his black horse. His weathered face carried an expression Elias had learned never to ignore. "Evening, Elias," the sheriff said quietly. "I need a private word." Elias stepped onto the porch. Sheriff Reed lowered his voice even further. "It's about the young woman staying here." He paused, glancing toward the dark valley beyond the ranch. "Someone in town has already started asking questions about Clara Bennett." His eyes met Elias's. "And I have a strong feeling this is only the beginning." Elias Rowan stepped quietly onto the front porch and eased the heavy wooden door closed behind him, making certain their conversation would not reach the guest room upstairs. The cool Wyoming night settled around them as the porch lantern cast a warm circle of light across the weathered floorboards. Beyond the ranch house, the valley rested beneath a blanket of stars, peaceful enough to make it difficult to believe that trouble had already begun to find its way there. Sheriff Thomas Reed slowly removed his black hat and brushed a thin layer of trail dust from the brim. Before speaking, he glanced toward the upstairs window where a faint glow still escaped through the curtains. "She doesn't look like someone searching for trouble," the sheriff said quietly. "But someone certainly seems interested in where she came from." Elias folded his arms across his chest. "Who?" The sheriff answered without hesitation. "Warren Blackwood." The name alone was enough to change the expression on Elias's face. Warren Blackwood wasn't simply another rancher. He was the wealthiest landowner in Red Cedar Valley. His cattle covered thousands of acres. His wagons supplied stores across 3 counties. His money reached nearly every business in town, and many local officials owed him one favor or another. Some admired the empire he had built through relentless determination. Others respected him only because refusing him often carried consequences they preferred to avoid. Very few people openly challenged Warren Blackwood. Those who did rarely enjoyed the experience. What business could Warren possibly have with Clara Bennett? Elias finally asked. Sheriff Reed slowly shook his head. "That's exactly what worries me." He leaned against the porch railing before continuing. "Less than an hour after your stagecoach arrived, one of Blackwood's foremen rode straight into town asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "He wanted to know if a young woman named Clara Bennett had arrived today." Elias looked at him carefully. He already knew her name? The sheriff nodded. He knew her last name before anyone in town had spoken it aloud. For several long seconds, neither man said another word. The quiet night suddenly felt much heavier. "I've known Warren for nearly 20 years, Sheriff Reed continued. "He's a patient man. He doesn't waste time chasing strangers. If he's looking for Clara Bennett, then he already believes she has something he wants." Inside the ranch house, Clara carefully unpacked the few possessions that remained from the life she had left behind. There were only a handful of dresses, neatly folded despite weeks of travel. A small stack of well-used schoolbooks. Several notebooks filled with lesson plans written in her own careful handwriting. A family Bible. And at the very bottom of her weathered leather suitcase rested a small wooden keepsake box wrapped inside a faded piece of cloth. She lifted it gently onto the bed. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. Then she slowly opened the lid. Inside rested several carefully folded letters written by her father over the years. Beside them lay an old silver pocket watch whose hands had stopped moving long ago. Underneath both items rested a folded map, its edges worn from years of careful handling. Faded pencil marks crossed several sections of the paper. Samuel Bennett had protected that map for as long as Clara could remember. Whenever she asked about it as a child, he would simply smile and tell her that some stories needed to wait until the proper time. Only a few days before his death had he finally placed the map into her hands. His voice had been weak, his breathing slow, yet his words remained perfectly clear. If anything ever happens to me, don't show this map to anyone except Elias Rowan. She had promised, and she intended to keep that promise. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. "It's Abigail," came the familiar voice from outside the bedroom. "I thought you might enjoy a cup of hot tea before turning in." Clara smiled and opened the door. Abigail entered carrying a polished tray with a steaming teapot, 2 delicate cups, fresh biscuits, and homemade blackberry preserves. "It's been many years," Abigail said warmly, placing the tray on the small table near the window, "since another woman has stayed in this house." Clara smiled. "You've lived here a long time?" "Nearly 15 years. Abigail settled into the rocking chair. "When my husband passed away, I didn't know how I'd survive alone." She glanced toward the hallway. "Elias insisted I remain here as the housekeeper. He wouldn't hear another word about it. That's simply the kind of man he is. He helps people whenever he can. He just doesn't believe kindness needs an audience." Clara looked toward the dark ranch outside the window. "He seems—" She searched for the right word. "Lonely." Abigail's smile softened. "I suppose many people would say that." She folded her hands quietly. "Years ago there was a young woman Elias intended to marry. They had planned a future together. But when a wealthy banker from Boston came through Wyoming, she chose comfort instead of love. Elias never spoke poorly of her. He simply buried himself in work." Abigail's eyes wandered toward the fireplace downstairs. "Since then, this ranch has been his entire world." Clara lowered her gaze. She suddenly understood why Elias carried himself with such quiet reserve. His silence wasn't coldness. It was disappointment carefully hidden beneath years of responsibility. Outside, Sheriff Reed placed his foot inside the stirrup of his black horse before pausing once more. "There's one more thing." Elias waited. "Warren Blackwood has quietly purchased nearly every parcel of land surrounding Silver Creek during the last 5 years. Elias felt a chill despite the calm evening. "I thought he already owned enough property. So did everyone else." The sheriff looked directly at him. "But men like Warren don't spend that kind of money unless they know something other people don't." He lowered his voice. "And if Samuel Bennett's daughter has returned because of whatever happened at Silver Creek, I don't believe Warren Blackwood will rest until he discovers exactly what she brought with her." Without another word, Sheriff Reed climbed into the saddle. His horse turned toward the narrow trail leading back to town. Within moments, both rider and horse disappeared into the darkness beneath the towering cottonwood trees. Elias remained standing alone on the porch. The cool wind carried the scent of autumn across the valley. He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded Samuel Bennett's final letter one more time. For years he had believed it was nothing more than the last request of an old friend. Now, it felt like something entirely different. It felt like the first page of a story that someone else had begun writing many years before. A story involving land, secrets, promises, and a young woman who had unknowingly carried all of it across 3 states to his front door. Far out across the quiet prairie, a lone rider paused briefly on a distant hill overlooking Rowan Ranch before disappearing into the darkness. Someone else was watching. Someone else was waiting. And Elias knew with complete certainty. Life in Red Cedar Valley would never be the same again. Morning arrived quietly over Red Cedar Valley, but peace never truly returned to Rowan Ranch. Long before the sun cleared the distant mountains, Elias Rowan was already awake, standing beside the corral with Samuel Bennett's letter folded carefully inside his coat. He watched the first rays of sunlight spread across the rolling prairie, yet his thoughts remained fixed on Sheriff Thomas Reed's warning. Warren Blackwood had been searching for Clara before she had even stepped off the stagecoach. That could only mean one thing. Samuel Bennett had been right all along. Whatever secret surrounded Silver Creek had never been forgotten. It had simply been waiting for Clara to arrive. Inside the ranch house, Clara Bennett awoke to the smell of fresh coffee and homemade biscuits. For the first time since leaving home, she had slept through the night without waking to every unfamiliar sound. Yet as she looked toward the small wooden box resting on the bedside table, her father's final words echoed once more inside her mind. "Trust Elias Rowan." She carefully picked up the folded map, still wrapped in the faded cloth Samuel had tied around it years earlier. The paper had grown brittle with age, but the pencil markings remained clear. One location had been circled several times: Silver Creek. After breakfast, Elias asked Clara to join him on the porch. Abigail quietly excused herself, sensing that the conversation belonged to them alone. Elias removed Samuel's letter from his pocket. "There's something your father wanted you to know." Clara immediately recognized the letter. "He wrote to you because he trusted you." "He did." Elias unfolded the paper carefully. "For years I believed he was protecting an old memory." He looked directly into Clara's eyes. "I was wrong." He explained everything Samuel had once told him. Many years earlier, Samuel Bennett had purchased a fertile stretch of land bordering Silver Creek. Rich soil, fresh water, and access to cattle trails made it one of the most valuable properties in the valley. Samuel planned to build a future there for his family. Then everything changed. One season later, documents appeared claiming the land had been legally sold. Samuel insisted he had never signed them. No lawyer would defend him. No bank would question the paperwork. Every witness who might have supported him either disappeared, changed their story, or suddenly refused to become involved. Within months, the property belonged to another investor. That investor later sold it to Warren Blackwood. Clara listened in stunned silence. "My father always said someone stole our future." Elias nodded. "I believe he was telling the truth." Clara slowly opened the wooden keepsake box. "I have something else." She carefully unfolded the old map. Elias spread it across the dining table. His eyes widened immediately. Hidden among the faded markings were measurements, handwritten notes, and survey lines matching the original property boundaries. Near the bottom appeared Samuel Bennett's signature. Alongside it rested the signature of the original county surveyor. "This," Elias whispered, "this proves where the original boundary actually stood." Sheriff Reed arrived less than an hour later. After examining the map himself, he slowly removed his spectacles and looked toward Clara. "If this document is genuine, it could reopen everything." Clara's voice trembled. "Then my father wasn't imagining any of it." "No," the sheriff answered quietly. "He was trying to protect the truth." That afternoon, the three of them rode together towards Silver Creek. The valley looked almost untouched despite the passing years. Crystal clear water flowed gently between tall cottonwood trees, while golden grass covered the surrounding hills. Wildflowers still bloomed along the creek banks exactly as Samuel had once described in his letters. Near an old oak tree, Elias stopped his horse. "I remember this place." Following the markings on Samuel's map, they searched the area until Sheriff Reed's boot struck something buried beneath the soil. Together they cleared away decades of dirt. A weathered stone survey marker slowly emerged from the ground. The sheriff compared its position to Samuel's map. Then he smiled. "It's exactly where the original survey says it should be." Clara covered her mouth. "My father told the truth. Every word." Sheriff Reed stood quietly. This marker was never moved. The paperwork was. The truth had survived. Not inside a courtroom, not inside a bank, but buried beneath the Wyoming earth itself. News spread quickly through Red Cedar Valley. Within weeks, county officials reopened the Bennett land records. Old witnesses finally came forward. Retired clerks admitted they had been pressured to ignore missing documents. A former survey assistant confessed that original boundary maps had disappeared shortly before Warren Blackwood completed his purchase years earlier. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the court ruled in Clara Bennett's favor. The Silver Creek property legally belonged to the Bennett family once again. Warren Blackwood challenged the decision. Then another, and another. Each appeal failed. For the first time in many years, money proved less powerful than the truth. Several months passed. Winter gave way to spring. The little schoolhouse in Red Cedar Valley opened its doors once more. Every weekday morning, children's laughter echoed across the valley as Clara Bennett stood before a room filled with eager young faces. Reading lessons replaced silence. Chalk dust filled the air. Parents who had once feared their children would grow up without an education now watched them carry books home each evening. The valley had found its teacher. Elias often found reasons to ride past the schoolhouse. Sometimes he delivered firewood, sometimes supplies. Sometimes he claimed he happened to be passing by. Abigail noticed every excuse. She smiled each time. One warm spring evening, after classes had ended, Elias asked Clara to walk with him beside Silver Creek. The same creek that had once carried so much sorrow now reflected the golden light of the setting sun. They stopped beneath the old oak tree where the survey marker had been found. Elias removed his hat. "I spent years believing this ranch would always be enough." He smiled gently. "Then you arrived carrying one suitcase and a letter that changed everything." Clara looked at him with tears shining in her eyes. "My father believed I'd find an honest man here." He was right. Elias reached into his coat pocket, not for a ring, but for Samuel Bennett's final letter. "I think your father knew that this letter wasn't only meant to return your land." He handed it to Clara. "It was meant to lead you home." Clara slipped her hand into his. Neither needed another promise. Sometimes the strongest promises are spoken without words. Months later, beneath a bright summer sky, the people of Red Cedar Valley gathered outside the little white church overlooking the valley. Sheriff Reed stood proudly near the front. Abigail wiped joyful tears from her eyes. Children from Clara's classroom scattered wildflowers along the church path. As the church bell rang across the valley, Elias Rowan and Clara Bennett began a new chapter together. Not because of a forgotten map or reclaimed land, but because two people who had carried loneliness for far too long had finally found the home they were both searching for. Samuel Bennett's greatest gift had never been Silver Creek. It had been bringing two good hearts together. And in the end, truth restored more than a piece of land. It restored a family. It restored hope. And it reminded an entire valley that while wealth and power may shape the course of history for a time, honesty, courage, and love have a way of finding their rightful place. Thank you for spending your time with us and following this journey from beginning to end. If this story touched your heart, we'd be honored if you'd subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who loves heartfelt Western stories. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We truly enjoy reading every message. Until our next story, may peace, hope, and kindness travel with you wherever you are.